so many things where I was so certain and so cocky and so sure of myself. And then just like thing after thing as I get older, realizing like I was so wrong and I didn't know what I was talking about, so it just becomes harder and harder to think like, oh, I'm really certain about all these things and that I have all the right answers. So it's just like all these things together, I think gave me some space to think about it in a different way. Think about it so certain, think about it cocky, think about it certain, so cocky.
What are the forces in the universe that brought us together at this point in time, right here and right now, Michael?
I was already kind of interested in this free will question. I had listened to your episode and I was like, oh, this is interesting. They're going to, tackle it from the LDS point of view.
Did we? I don't remember if we did it from an LDS point of view.
You didn't at all. That's what I was expecting. I clicked on it and I listened and, I kind of have this obsessive personality. I was listening and I was thinking about all the things,
you wrote me a book, man. That email was long.
I did. I was just, going through it and thinking about the arguments you guys made and some responses.
It just wasn't very satisfactory to you, was it, Michael? There were just things that I said that you're like, no, I got to straighten that guy
out. There's some of that, it's like I have a hard time, people, I can't go on Facebook anymore because I'll just get sucked into arguments,
I really hope, Michael, that the days of arguing over the supremacy of ideas is over for me. It's not like, here is the truth about free will or whatever it is, and I know it and you don't. But it's like, I'm trying to figure this stuff out, and here's what I think. And I'm really interested to know what you're seeing and why you're seeing it that way, and just to have a conversation about it that isn't like a battle over the supremacy of ideas. I think that's the best way that I can say it.
I love that perspective. I'm trying to be more like that myself, because I feel like the church really drilled into me this black and white, right and wrong. We have the truth. We have, the absolute monopoly on all this stuff. And so my brain still goes there. You spend all this time thinking that you have the right answers, and you're told that you have to go out and evangelize and tell everyone else, or else their eternal soul is at stake.
This is Infants on Thrones.
Baby steps.
You want someone to preach to you.
The philosophies of men.
I like magical toys.
You want religion, do you?
Mingled with humor.
I don't believe in them.
There will be many willing to preach to you the philosophies of men mingled with humor.
We are evolving.
Baby steps.
You can buy anything in this world of money.
Look for the good in everything. Look for the people who will set your soul free. It always seems impossible until it's done. Look for the good in everyone.
All right, welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and this is episode 749. Free Will Revisited, a discussion on certainty, black and white thinking, and the interconnectedness of all things. And today I'm joined by Michael, a relatively new listener of Infants on Thrones, who had some things that he wanted to process in response to the Free Will episodes 724 and 725 that I recorded and published last April, about the same time, incidentally, that Michael was deciding to leave the Mormon Church. Or about the same time that decision was being made for Michael by pre-existing natural causes that he is absolutely not responsible for. Maybe, maybe not. Who can know for sure, right? And that's really part of the underlying subtext of today's conversation, where Michael is attempting to better understand his relationship with certainty and black and white thinking a few months after his decision to leave the Mormon Church. So how do you feel about certainty now?
Well, I mean, I don't have it for anything really, and that makes me really uncomfortable. I really like having the answers. I really like being certain. I I really like the church telling me like this is what's true. I really like knowing what's going to happen when we die. I know exactly what happened before we came here. I know what my purpose is, to wipe all that off the board and to not know anything for sure. It's really uncomfortable. I don't enjoy it.
Now, don't worry. Michael admitted that he was being hyperbolic there. There are actually things that he knows for sure. But what about this Mormon idea of free agency, of being free to choose, of having the ability to choose something that is free and independent from any and all prior causes? So let me ask you this, dear listener. What do you think about this? When it comes to freedom of will or freedom of choice, how much influence do you have over the choices that you make in your own life? Do you feel like you're more like a leaf being blown around by wind without any real control over how you respond to that wind? Or do you feel like you're steering a sailboat, making small incremental choices that determine how the wind will move you? And what are some of the prior causes that would make you lean more towards the leaf metaphor rather than the steering the ship metaphor? One of the big questions that I have is, why is this so important to you? And I think I heard a little bit of that when you said, I used to believe that I was the captain of the ship when I was Mormon, but now I realize that all of Mormonism is bullshit, and so this is going down with the ship. I can't allow myself to believe that anymore, because then I might get sucked into like foolishness or something like that again. But that's one question. I'll let you respond to that in a second. But the second one is, how is what you're saying anything other than predeterminism, that we just don't have any choice at all? We are just like a leaf that falls off of a tree, and we're subject to the whims of everything that's going on around us. And we don't have, we aren't responsible for where we land or how we move or what we do, because that is so contrary to the way that every single person lives life and experiences life. So in a nutshell, that is today's episode. I hope you enjoy it. And if you would like to have a similar conversation with me, please reach out at infantsonthrones@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. But for now,
hang on to them hats and glasses, because this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
And now the recording is in progress. You just heard that.
Perfect.
So, Michael, thanks for reaching out. We're just getting to know each other here on this call. Tell me a little bit about what are the forces in the universe that brought us together at this point in time, right here and right now, Michael?
Well, I mean, a couple that are obvious is that my mom listens to your podcast.
Yeah.
And so she told me to listen. And before that, though, I was already kind of interested in this free will question. I had listened to a couple of YouTube, seminar things that Sam Harris had done and some debates that he had done with other people. I think I listened to a conversation.
Oh, like the Jordan Peterson?
No.
Oh, I guess they didn't really talk about free will, did they? They were talking about other things. They were talking about truth.
I'm trying to remember who. I know he did one with Daniel Dennett, who's kind of like the big compatibilist. They had a long conversation. I listened to that one. Mm-hmm. I read his book, and I actually listened to the podcast that he did that you guys were referencing and critiquing on the episode you did. So I saw your episode and I was like, oh, this is interesting. They're going to, tackle it from the LDS point of view, because agency is such a huge part of the church and the doctrine. So, jumped right in.
I don't remember if we did it from an LDS point of view.
You didn't at all. That's what I was expecting. But that's, that was, I clicked on it and I listened and, I kind of have this obsessive personality. I was listening and I was thinking about all the things, that.
Yeah, you wrote me a book, man. That email was long.
I did. I was just, going through it and thinking about the arguments you guys made and some responses. And I was just kind of working through it in my head and I wrote it all out. And I said, well, I might as well send it. And
it just wasn't it wasn't very satisfactory to you, was it, Michael? There were just things that I said that you're like, no, I got to straighten that guy out.
There is some of that, it's like I have a hard time, people, I can't go on Facebook anymore because I'll just get sucked into arguments and
right. Yeah.
Well, I could sense the same frustration that you had with Sam Harris. It's like you were bristling at some of the stuff that he said. And so
yeah. Well, and I think I said this in that episode. I hope I did. I really hope, Michael, that the days of arguing over the supremacy of ideas is over for me. That it's not like I think here is the truth about free will or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and I know it and you don't. But it's like, I'm trying to figure this stuff out, and here's what I think. What do you think? And like, I'll compare with you what I see, and I'll explain to you why I see it that way. And I'm really interested to know what you're seeing and why you're seeing it that way, and just to have a conversation about it that isn't like an argument or like a battle over the supremacy of ideas. I think that's the best way that I can say it. So I know I definitely, and it's been probably 6 months or more since I did that episode, and my thoughts have shifted since then, because that was part of my process of trying to figure out what I really even thought of it. And one of the biggest issues I remember having with that is I didn't know what he meant by free will. Like, what is he saying? What is he arguing doesn't exist? I still didn't quite understand that point. But anyway, so I'm really happy to get your email. Happy to have this conversation with you now. Look forward to where it's going. And before we really get into the free will part, I'd like to know more about your background, because you told me in the email about your mom listening to the podcast, and that you're recently out of the church, like fairly recent. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that and you, so that I know, as you're bringing your views to the table on this, kind of where those views have been shaped a bit.
Sure. First, let me just respond to what you said. I mean, I think I love that perspective. I'm trying to be more like that myself, because I feel like the church really drilled into me this black and white, right and wrong. We have the truth.
Yeah.
We have,
Yeah.
The absolute monopoly on, on all this stuff. And so my brain still goes there. You spend all this time thinking that you have the right answers, and you're told that you have to go out and evangelize and tell everyone else, or else their eternal soul is at stake.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that approach. Because really, we don't, it's hard to know this stuff, and so it's fun to just talk about ideas, and instead of starting at the answer and trying to make things fit, just kind of looking at everything and
yeah. Or thinking that somebody is fundamentally flawed because they haven't come to the same conclusion that I have, when I really stop and think about it, every experience that I've had in my life, my schooling, relationships that I've had with people, conversations, nobody has that same mix.
Yeah.
Nobody does. And so how could I expect that? And even if I had like some evil twin that was with me all of the time, they probably would still interpret things differently than I did, even if they had every single experience that I've had. So there's just so many different views out there to think that I've got it figured out. Yeah, I don't want to go back to that black and white Mormon formed view.
I mean, so my background, I'm 35. I was raised in the church. My grandparents, my mom's side, were converts. My grandparents on my dad's side were not. It goes a little bit farther back on that side. My parents met on their mission. My mom is from Denmark. So I was raised there. Partly they all live there now. I grew up mostly in California. I mean, but just church has been the center of.
Whereabouts in Denmark?
Right outside of Copenhagen.
Okay. I used to work for a company that has a manufacturing facility about 45 minutes north of Copenhagen.
Oh, fun.
So I've been there a few times and loved it.
Awesome. Yeah.
I loved it.
How much
time did you spend growing up there?
We moved there when I was about 7, and then moved back to the States when I was about 12. And then I moved back there when I was, like 18, 19, right before my mission. And at that point, my mom and my brother had moved back there. And so they all still lived there. And then I went on a mission and then came back and then was there for a little bit and then have come back to the States ever since. Okay. So but always been, deep into the church, always believed it, always, very faithful and very.
Did your mom leave before you did?
Yeah, she's been out for a while.
Yeah. What did you think when she first started straying?
She didn't even really tell us, until she wasn't very vocal until a couple of years ago. But, I learned now that she's kind of been out for, maybe 8 or 9 years. And she kept a lot of that inside, and it's been very frustrating for her. At least that's what I make up. I think she's felt very isolated. But it was really hard. And then I've had mission companions that have left, and each time, or just close friends or other family members, and each time someone leaves, it's a strike at my identity. It's like, this is the thing that I've built my life around, and you're telling me it's wrong. You're telling me that it's not true, that you think it's toxic or whatever. And so it's a challenging thing because sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, what was it that broke the shelf for you?
It's hard for me to zero in on one specific thing. I mean, but it kind of, I think it's been percolating for a couple of years for me. And then with COVID, we stopped going to church and felt awesome about that. It was so nice to be home. Funny enough, the Trump stuff and the COVID stuff was a huge kind of eye opener for me, something that helped me get some distance to start thinking about the church in a more, critical, objective way, because the church is so tied into the right-wing politics in America. It was just baffling to me that people who espouse Christian values could support Trump in the way that they did. It was really hard for me to see people that I grew up respecting so much, leaders that were now supporting this guy that I felt to be immoral and incompetent.
Yeah.
And then, at some point, during the COVID year, I read a couple books. I read a book called Zealot that also, kind of opened my eyes. I was reading the whole time and just kind of learning a lot and thinking a lot. And it's like, none of the stuff that they teach you at church lines up with kind of what we know historically about the Bible and about Jesus as a person.
So Zealot is about like the historical Jesus, right?
Yeah.
I think I've read that book. It's been a while.
It's about
what were your main takeaways from that book?
Just, one of the big things was how we use the scriptures in the LDS Church. Just there isn't a strong basis for it. The scriptural literalism, learning that Mark was written so long afterwards, and that the other gospels were written even longer after that. And a lot of this stuff is kind of myth making and really cultural at the time, 100 years after, whoever it was. And there's just all these little, facts that he kind of picks apart. He looks at, okay, this meeting with Pilate probably didn't happen. It's very unlikely that it happened given what we know about the history at the time. The Romans kept such good records. And so these are all the things that probably aren't, right as well. I mean, so there's just a lot of things that, the main takeaway was the conception that I've had of Jesus and of the Gospels and of their accuracy doesn't seem to match.
All right. So that sent you tumbling down the rabbit hole, huh?
Well, so that kind of, so a lot of all these things separately kind of gave me space. And then I think maybe what really pushed me over the edge was the Natasha Helfer Parker stuff. When she was going through her process, I listened, I think, to, 5 or 6 hours of conversations that she did on the Mormon Stories podcast about her excommunication experience. And I found it extremely upsetting. And, it just, I recognized a lot of what she was talking about as far as what the church teaches about sexuality, and just seeing how she was treated and how the church approaches that stuff. I think, that was kind of the thing that maybe tipped me over the edge. And then that gave me enough mental space to start looking at all these things that I had looked at before, but had never really given a fair shake, stuff like the CES letter, stuff like, letter to my wife, or just really anything that you might find on Mormon Think or all that kind of stuff.
So it sounds like it was really the culture of church members, which includes things like politics, the way that they were treating people like Natasha and others that you saw, and you just went, "No, this isn't right. This doesn't. At least it didn't mesh with what you felt was right."
Yeah, the way I would put it, because it really is important to me whether it's true or not. At the end of the day, my own values, I feel like had been in conflict with the church for some time, especially with LGBTQ stuff. But I'd always kind of come back to, well, it's true, so I got to figure out some way to make this work, like, okay, polygamy and all these things that Joseph Smith did. I'm really uncomfortable with a lot of this, but it's true. So I'm going to figure out how to make it work and all that. But these things that I've described, I think finally gave me enough mental separation to where I could look honestly at those issues and assess the evidence for a lot of that stuff in a way that I hadn't before. And so I was able to kind of go down the rabbit hole and kind of look at all the data in a new way, which then helped me, I think, to disconnect and see, okay, it's not really true. And also this stuff doesn't line up with my values.
How long do you think, you said that you were struggling with some things for a while and you just kind of like set them aside, like polygamy. How long do you think you were struggling with those things before you finally felt comfortable? Okay, I'm gonna really honestly explore this.
I mean, those things have bothered me my entire life, but it's like, you can't touch it. I mean, it's like blacks in the priesthood, polygamy, a lot of this culturally toxic stuff. I mean, it's like, you know that it's wrong, even if you can't do anything about it, or even if you're not at the point where you can say, well, this is not right, or this is not true. So I'd always made the argument, it's like, you can go down any number of rationalizations why you got to stay in, or why it's not so bad, or why, it was a different time, speaking as a man, not as a prophet, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't know, I became very aware too, just of my own biases and kind of digging into more stuff and understanding confirmation bias and a few of these others that kind of play into it. I forget what they're all called, but like the idea that you hear something, the more likely you are to believe it's true. The more people believe things around you, the more likely you are to accept something. I mean, there's just a couple of things that really kind of clicked for me, and I realized, like, okay, I'm probably, haven't been seeing things too clearly, which is hard. Okay. There's a last thing. I mean, getting older too, I realize more and more how wrong I am about so much stuff. So many things where I was so certain and so cocky and so sure of myself. And then just like thing after thing as I get older, realizing like I was so wrong and I didn't know what I was talking about, so it just becomes harder and harder to think like, oh, I'm really certain about all these things and that I have all the right answers. So it's just like all these things together, I think gave me some space to think about it in a different way.
So how do you feel about certainty now?
Well, I mean, I don't have it for anything really. And that makes me really uncomfortable. I really like having the answers. I really like being certain. I really like the church telling me like, this is what's true. I really like knowing what's going to happen when we die. I know exactly what happened before we came here. I know what my purpose is, to wipe all that off the board and to not know anything for sure. It's really uncomfortable. I don't enjoy it.
Is it that you don't know anything for sure?
No.
Like, are there things that you know for sure?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. I was being a little,
I know,
a little hyperbolic.
Hyperbolic. We all do.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you know for sure?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's even stuff in the scientific world where we think we know it for sure, that you accept as a certainty, something like gravity, but even something like gravity we don't perfectly understand, and our understanding has shifted about what that is. I mean, so I want to say, like, I'm sure that I exist. I'm sure that I love my wife and my son. I'm sure that I love my family.
Well, good. That's where I was going to steer you.
Okay.
You went right there, right on. So there are certain things in your life, and the reason I asked that, I think it's a really valuable exercise to kind of like dial down in concentric circles. Like, okay, there's these big things about the universe or God or the meaning of life. Like, I don't really know, but you bring it in closer. Okay, I know I'm breathing right now. I know I'm alive. I know I've got enough food in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
You know, I know I've got a job, or maybe I know that I don't have a job, you know, whichever your situation you're in. I know I've got a wife. I know we've got my son, and things like that. But I think to your point, it's not that Mormonism ignores those things, but it stitches it all together into this much larger narrative that once some of those things fall apart, then kind of everything's almost up for grabs. Is that how you feel?
In a way, I mean, a lot has felt up for grabs. I mean, there's a lot of things that don't feel like they're really changing at all. You know, like I feel like a lot of my values and some of my beliefs, are pretty stable. You know, it's like I believe love is important and kindness is important, and that we should help each other and treat each other well. And I believe in integrity. I believe that truth matters. Those kind of. I mean, so there's a lot of things that don't change, but there's so much other stuff. So it's like, is there a God? Is there not a God? Like, what's the nature of reality? What's the point? Is there a point? Do I matter? Maybe not. I mean, does life matter? Maybe not. I don't know.
You matter to that son of yours.
Yeah.
And hopefully to your wife as well.
I hope so, to both.
Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything that you want to get out of the way before we launch into the free will stuff?
I don't know if we need to spend a lot of time, but I've been listening to some of your other episodes, and I guess I'll just say that I was listening to the Mormon on Mushrooms episode that you have, and I think I wrote this in the little note, but this has been another part of my journey, just like the plant medicine, psychedelics, that kind of stuff. That's been a real area of interest, and it seems like it has for you as well. So we don't have to go into that, but I thought I'd just throw that out there. If
it's something that you have experience with, or just interest in?
Experience with, and interest.
And is that like recently within the kind of COVID time? Is it all kind of part and parcel, the experience with the psychedelics showing you another way of viewing things? So
funny enough, I was starting down that journey even before I had an inkling that I was going to leave the church. I had psilocybin or mushrooms in particular, I feel like aren't even maybe that out of harmony with the church's teachings, except for the legality of them. I mean, so this is a whole other tangent, but so I was going on a trip and I checked out a Michael Pollan book. This is what's it called? Changing Your Mind.
How to Change Your Mind.
How to Change Your Mind.
Yeah.
I borrowed it from the digital library. I thought it was about something completely different, and then it just completely blew my mind and kind of sent me down a rabbit hole. But even as a true believing member, I didn't feel like that was a real violation. It's not addictive. It's not harmful. It's actually something that can be very therapeutic and very helpful. It helps people connect to spirituality and to God. So I kind of had a lot of stories that I told myself, even while I was still fully in, and experimented and had experiences with it even at that point.
That's really interesting. So, I kind of dabbled with mushrooms before I did an ayahuasca ceremony. And I feel like doing an ayahuasca ceremony with a shaman and a group of people in a more structured ritualistic setting is a lot different experience than just doing some mushrooms and listening to music on my bed,
Yeah, absolutely.
But I felt like that ayahuasca experience was the closest thing to really being in the celestial room of the temple, if that was actually a thing that I had ever experienced before. But I was out of the church at that point. So I was already, I'd been doing Infants on Thrones and just podcasting in this world for years before I had any of those experiences.
Yeah.
So what was it like being in and still believing and having a psilocybin experience? Did you feel like you were communing with angels, spirits, God?
No, none of that. I did kind of a guided trip with someone, with kind of a therapist person, with actually two people who were kind of there throughout the whole experience, and did a heavy dose. And I was expecting that. I was expecting to have, the transcendent, like connected to the universe. I love everything. And it just, it didn't quite happen that way. But it was, it was obviously a very meaningful experience. I plan to do it again and try to, some other things as well. Ayahuasca is something that's been on my list. I really would like to try it. I mean, it was really centered around kind of trauma work for me, wanting to just kind of push through some old experiences. I really wanted to connect spiritually. I really wanted to have that ego death. I wanted to touch something greater than myself and to feel that. I did feel, at one point, like, okay, I could die and that would be okay. I had kind of a sense of peace with my own, place in the universe. And there were certain points later on in the experience where I felt really powerful. I felt, I don't know, almost animalistic. This is anyway, this is kind of big tangent, but it's really cool. I think everyone would benefit from something like that with the right oversight and intentions. Obviously, we know how important that is.
Yeah. So you desire all to receive it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so psilocybin, I mean, you're very, I feel constrained, by what's available and what you can do without great travel, but so far I've tried psilocybin and mescaline through a cactus, like a San Pedro cactus. San Pedro cactus. And that was completely different, but also pretty meaningful, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. So does that lead you to the free will discussion, or is it really just a tangent?
It's probably just a tangent, but
okay. All right.
But I wasn't sure where we'd go, so I thought I'd just throw it out here.
Me neither. I just thought let's get on.
Yeah.
You had so much to say in that email, and I don't like reading very much anymore. I would much rather just get on and have a conversation. So let's start walking through. So I think that was the very first episode of Infants on Thrones that you listened to. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the first ones where I listened, I think, all the way through with that little depth. My mom had recommended a couple, with the general conference episodes with the impressions and stuff. So I dabbled in a couple of those, but this was one where it really struck my interest at the time and dove in head first. And
all right. So do it. Go.
Well, okay. So the basic gist of my email to you, I had three main responses, right? One of the things that you guys brought up was the, basically, is it subconscious you or conscious you, dime size me, or the whole thing? And basically, my reaction and kind of what I wrote in the email is I feel like that's besides the point. I don't think it matters to whether or not we have free will.
So help me understand, like, what do you see? Like, how do you define free will? What is free will?
I mean, it's probably a better place to start. I mean, Sam Harris, he has his two assumptions, right? The idea that you could have chosen otherwise, and then this conscious feeling that you are the cause of things, that you have the ability to choose and alter. I mean, what we learn in the church, you're an agent to act for yourself and not to be acted upon.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, the first of those 2 points, if I remember right, he's like the idea that if I could go back in time, I would make a different choice.
Yeah.
Is just a spurious idea, because if you really did go back in time, you would be in that moment. You wouldn't have all of the knowledge that you gained after that experience to inform your decision at the time. You would have only whatever you had at that time, which was used to make that decision and make that choice. So you would make the same choice over and over again because of the deterministic world that we live in. And it's an output of all of these unconscious processes, these programs that are going on behind the scenes. So you're not free to go back in time and change things from what they were, which to me, like, who thinks that? Who thinks that they could go back? Like, I know people, kind of like I said to you earlier, what was it? You said I'm just being hyperbolic.
Yeah.
Like people go, oh, if I could do that over again, I would totally do that over again. But does that really mean that they believe in free will, or they're just expressing remorse or a regret?
Don't most people think that? People who maybe don't think about it too deeply, don't they feel like, okay, I could have chosen something different?
Or should have is what I hear a lot, like, well, why did I marry that person? or we could think about the church. Why didn't I figure this out sooner?
Yeah. Or
why didn't I leave sooner?
I didn't exercise yesterday. I should have, or I did the thing I wasn't supposed to do. I had that piece of cake and I shouldn't have, and I could have. It was a lapse in my discipline, but I could have done it, and that's why I'm mad at myself for doing it.
Yeah.
The whole, and he points this out, like, our whole justice system and certainly the religious world is based on this idea that you could have acted differently, because they certainly punish you that way.
I guess. I think they punish you based on what you did do, not on like what you could have done differently, right? I don't know. Maybe it's baked into it a little bit. Well, I still just have a hard time seeing this as being a part of the definition of free will. I just don't understand it.
Well, so you walk me through your concept of free will then.
I don't have a concept of free will. I guess if I have any concept of free will, it's like right in the moment. So it doesn't have anything to do with regret or remorse, except that in the moment I'm having these regretful and remorseful feelings and thoughts. So what do I do with them? So I've got a choice. And so you made this distinction in your email that Sam Harris isn't saying that you don't have a choice. Yeah. I guess, and that there is some freedom of choice, but it's like constrained within certain parameters of what's possible.
Well,
it's not like you couldn't choose anything. Like I can't jump off of a cliff and fly. I think, was that your example in the email? Or is that something else?
I think that was something else. And you guys talked about this too, right? Because we can acknowledge that choices are constrained, obviously. But I think one of the points you made in the email, or one of the points you made in your discussion is, okay, if I set the table and I have 10 plates, maybe it's not 1 million plates or it's not 100 plates, but it's 10 plates, I still choose between those 10 plates. And I think his point is, you have the experience of making a choice, but the reason why you're making that choice is flowing from prior causes. It's determined by everything that came before.
Okay. And I think this ties it back to that big circle, little circle thing that you were asking the question about, where you thought that it was irrelevant. Yeah. And I guess I think my view of that big circle, little circle might have shifted a little bit since then, but I don't know if it shifted a lot, because the big circle that I'm talking about is the central nervous system. It's the entire mind. It's everything that the brain is doing.
Sure.
And there's only a small sliver of that I'm consciously aware of or have any kind of control or influence over, and that's the little circle. And so if there are prior causes that existed before that are part of that big circle unconscious mind that are making me feel like I have a choice to pick plate number 2 out of 10. Yeah. And I think I did that because I'm free. Well, it's actually because in the past, you had this experience and your brain's making all of these calculations, and it's telling you based on our past experience, the safest choice is the second of those 10 plates, not the other one. And I think I'm going, oh, I like the look of it. I like this better. And so I'm choosing it now, but it's really because my inner intelligence, my unconscious intelligence, these prior causes that arise have made that decision for me. Yeah. And the me we're talking about is that small conscious me, but that bigger part is still me, because it's still based on everything that I've ever experienced in the past.
Totally.
And so it's not separate from me, but it's a different it's a different me than the conscious me.
Yeah. So this was the first thing I was reacting to, right? So this distinction between little me, big me, I don't think it matters as far as free will is concerned, right? Because we can acknowledge that it's the bigger you making the decision, that it's the central nervous system has taken in all this sensory data, and it's has all its automatic processes, so it's spitting out intentions, feelings, thoughts, and then we're having a conscious experience where we're acting on those things, whether we are kind of aware of it or not. It's all you, but none of it's free.
What does that mean? It's not free.
We're not the conscious driver or origin of whatever it is we're talking about. So you pick plate number 2, and right before you picked it, you had a thought, you had an intention, you had a desire, you had a preference, but all of those things kind of just bubbled up from the ether. You didn't decide to have you didn't decide to have that preference, you didn't decide to have that thought, you didn't decide to have that desire. All of that flows from prior causes.
So I totally agree with the statement that the small circle conscious part of my mind did not create these circumstances. It's not the cause of them. But I don't know why that is tied to the idea of freedom.
Well, so if we're talking freedom, like external coercion or external influences, so no one has a gun to your head, then sure, you have, in that sense, you have the freedom to act whatever your desire is or whatever your intention is, but you don't have the freedom to choose what the intention is or what the desire is. Those things are coming, naturally from prior causes. And so there isn't a sense of autonomous, independent free will where I am a causal agent, and I can choose whatever I want. I guess I can choose whatever I want, but I can't choose what I want. What I want comes naturally. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I'm thinking back to our earlier conversation about your experience leaving the church.
Sure.
And you went through a long period of time where there were things that bothered you, but you chose not to pursue that because you chose to stay in the church and believe that it's true. But maybe you would not look at that as a choice. I guess that's my question. Do you see that what you were doing during that time was making a conscious choice to keep your faith, even though there was all this pressure that was building, this dissonance that was building, that you were choosing to not release that pressure, to bottle it up, and that the choices that you made then impacted more of those prior causes that were coming up, and there was this interplay between the two? Does that make sense? Yeah,
I think so. I guess it applies generally to anything. What does it mean to say that we choose something? I think that I was, those choices were a product of everything that came before. If you believe that there's cause and effect in the universe, if you believe that things aren't just gonna to come from nothing, then whatever a choice I make in an individual slice of time is determined by everything that came before it.
Right. So I guess if we're talking about slices of time, that there might be helpful to think about 3, just large: the past, the present, and the future. And the present is always just like this moment to moment thing that we're constantly in. And the past doesn't really exist because
neither does the future.
What came before, and the future doesn't really exist, right?
Yeah.
The only thing that really exists is this moment that we're in right now. And the things that we're these prior causes that are influencing us are things that came about from previous prior moments that we call the past. And so you're saying we're not free to just change the past. The past is what it is, everything that's in that moment. So if we're thinking about you in your process of leaving the church, can you think of a time when someone like one of these missionary companions left the church and said, "Hey, Michael, you should really read this book," and you made the decision, "No, I'm not gonna"?
There are tons of moments like that, and usually it's.
And is that a choice?
I I don't think it is in the sense that we're thinking of, where it's a free, autonomous, independent choice. I mean, just for ease of reference, I mean, this chunk of meat here and my experience, I did make a choice, but that choice was informed and flowed from everything that came before, So I would choose to read something like the CES letter, and I'd go through it, and all the thoughts I'm having about it, the ways that I'm discounting it, the ways that I'm rationalizing it. I mean, all of that's, bubbling up from the ether. It's, I can't choose to think about it in a different way. Those thoughts, those feelings, those intentions, those reactions, and ultimately, the actual decisions that I make, all of that is being informed by what came before.
I liked that you said, what was it? Free, autonomous, independent.
Yeah.
You're like, it's not a free autonomous, because it is a choice. You did make a choice, but that choice is being informed by stuff that was already there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's a choice that you're making. It's not a free choice that is free, autonomous, independent from those prior causes.
Right.
It's a result of them. I heard, I don't remember where I heard this, but it was within the last day or two. It was there's a Stanford professor named Fred Laskin who did studies on forgiveness. And I was listening to an interview that was done with him, and he was talking about that a lot of the trauma that people carry that can be relieved by forgiving either yourself or other people is when you have an expectation that something is supposed to be one way, but then reality is a different way. And then there's this dissonance in between that you don't know what to do with. And forgiveness is a way of just relieving that pressure and kind of accepting what is, instead of like holding yourself to this impossible standard.
What we came to see after looking at all of the myriad of people who have gone through our trainings was they were all upset because something in life didn't work out the way they thought it should, or it didn't accord to the picture they had of what they wanted their life to look at. And they couldn't forgive the fact that the picture of reality was different than the picture that they had in their head of how it should be. And it all came out to, you want one thing, you got another. You make peace with no. Take the offense less personally. So instead of like personalizing it, it was there to harm me, and they did it to harm me. To depersonalize some of it, to take responsibility then for my reaction to the hurt, which is to calm down, change my story, like stop blaming so much, and to create a better story around what happened that wasn't so crippling to my well-being.
And he said, so if you've had an experience in the past or even recently where somebody's really hurt you, you could be in that moment thinking, man, that person hurt me and it's horrible. And you're thinking that those are your thoughts. He goes, but you could also think, right now I've got a refrigerator full of food. I've got a roof over my head. I'm safe. I'm happy. And somebody recently hurt me and it hurt real bad. So you're not ignoring that. You're not discounting that, but you're also including all of these other things, because that's more true to your real lived experience than just being hyper focused on this one negative thing that then blows it out of proportion. So I listened to him talk about that, and it sure sounds to me like what he's saying is, in that moment, you have a choice on what you're going to focus your attention on. And it's not a free choice in the sense that you could focus your attention on something that has never even entered your consciousness. It's constrained by all of the prior causes. It's constrained by the reality that's around you. But there is some kind of mechanism that he's talking about that allows a person to go, I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to change the way that I'm telling the story. And then that's going to impact the way that I feel about it. So what, I guess my question would be, do you agree that that's something that people have and can do? And is that agency or choice, or like what is that?
Yeah. So first answer, yes. I obviously people do that, but I don't think it's an example of agency. And I've wrestled with this a lot too. I mean, so I don't know if you've read 7 Habits of Highly,
Effective
effective people,
people?
or I guess even the Viktor
Yeah.
Frankl, Man's Search for Happiness.
It's been a while. Yeah.
So none of that's important to the quote. I mean, but he basically, one of the famous parts of that is, between stimulus and response, there's a space where you can make it. I mean, and that's a little bit kind of sounds like what he's saying. He's like, okay, between stimulus and response, there's an opportunity to put something in between that might change what the response is. And so that is highly suggestive that, okay, we're not just these automatons where, you have these prior causes that spits out an automatic answer, but there's this space in between where we as causal agents can take that and do something different with them. And kind of what I've come to think about that is that really what's happening in the space isn't free will. It's just other causes that are part of the original mix, so someone, I mean, so the example of forgiving someone, right? I mean, so, okay, someone is really mean to you and you have all these angry feelings, but then you remember, okay, I have all these other good things in my life, right? And so that allows you to think about it differently. I mean, so I don't think that's an example of free will of someone, making a conscious decision to steer the ship. I think those are just all causes. Those are all competing stimuli that spit out the final answer.
I like that you said steer the ship.
Let me say it a different way. I mean, so I think a lot of this comes from an imperfect understanding of what the underlying causes are. I think it's a little bit like God of the gaps almost. It's like free will of the gaps, so it's like we have such a limited understanding of what drives our thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And we have this conscious experience of making choices and being free. So when things happen and when we make a decision and we don't see all the underlying causes, we kind of insert ourselves as the explanation. We say, okay, well, that's me. I did that. But if we had a perfect understanding of everything that was feeding into that decision, maybe we wouldn't have that confusion.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a metaphor right now, Michael, and this isn't very well thought out or developed. So I'm just going to throw it out here and tell me what you think about this. Okay. So you talked about steering the ship, and that's kind of what triggered this. You got somebody that's on a sailboat and they've got their sail up. The wind is what's moving the boat along, and maybe it's going at 40 knots or I'm not a nautical person. I don't know how fast that is. I'm just throwing out words. They're not really moving at all. They're standing still, even though they're traveling at 40 miles an hour, whatever that would be. The wind is doing the work. And if the wind blows harder, then they go faster. If the wind lets up, they're not going as fast. If there's a storm, that's going to impact it. The waves are going to impact it. The only thing the person on the boat really can do, aside from put the sail up or down or move it, is kind of steer.
Mm-hmm.
Like move. And even then there's some kind of constraints. You can't just like stop on a dime and do a, 180 degree turn and go, there's certain natural constraints on the freedom that somebody has to steer that ship. And so I'm thinking about that as a metaphor for what we're talking about, that there are unconscious thoughts, these prior causes, the environment that we're in, all of these things that are kind of moving us forward. We have the illusion of movement, even though we're really not moving. We're just kind of responding to what is coming and showing up, but we can steer it in one direction or another. And then that is going to have some impact on what goes on, because you could steer yourself into a cliff or something.
Yeah. I think the example begs the question a little bit, because we have, the autonomous agent built into the example. I mean, as an alternative, what if we were thinking of like a leaf on a tree and it's now fall. And so that leaf, comes off the branch and it starts drifting down towards the ground. And then suddenly it starts moving up. It doesn't go to the ground, but it starts picking itself up and going.
Well, because the wind is blowing, the leaf isn't lifting itself up. Or you're saying that the leaf has like some
exactly right.
superpower? What are you saying?
Exactly that. I'm saying in this case, you have an understanding of the causes, right? You know that it's not the leaf lifting itself up. You know, it's another factor, the wind.
Yeah.
You know, but so we would have every expectation that if it was completely still, you know, based on the laws of cause and effect, the leaf falls off the branch, it's going to hit the ground. But now a new variable has been introduced. If you don't know what wind is and you're just watching the leaf and then suddenly you see the leaf move, it would be natural to assume, okay, well, the leaf is flying and it's moving itself. And so I think that's kind of the same mistake we make with the person in the boat. You know, we say, okay, well, so we know the wind and we know the water and we know that sails do this. And then this thing is moving and we don't understand how that works. And so we say, well, he's doing it himself. But even if you keep going into where do the thoughts come from? Where do the feelings come from? Where do the intentions come from? We really don't understand. They come from some other unconscious thing that we don't see and that we can't explain.
For sure. Yeah. And the only question really that I have for you in those two metaphors, what does it feel more like to you in the way that you live your life? Do you feel like a leaf that is falling off of a tree that you're just kind of subject to what's going on around you? Or do you feel like you're on a boat and you can steer at least a little bit and make some changes that have some impact on your life?
Well, my whole life I've felt like I'm on the boat and I'm in charge. I'm the captain of the ship and I'm making all the moves. And I think that's part of why this topic makes me a little uncomfortable because it's counterintuitive to what I've been taught my whole life. But another thing I mentioned in the email, and I think this is something you've experienced with too, is like I've been into meditation now for several years and practice, you know, pretty consistently. And the more I do that, the more it challenges this idea that I am steering the ship, you know, and anyone who's spent significant time meditating has the experience of sitting and their mind just basically going off the rails and doing its own thing. You're trying to focus on the breath. You're trying to keep your attention on one thing, and the mind will just keep coming in with thoughts over and over again. And I'm not consciously trying to have thoughts. I'm not trying to think about this. I'm not trying to think about that. I'm trying to focus on my breath, and the mind has a mind of its own, you know, and same thing sometimes with feelings, sometimes with the things that I want. I really more and more as I think about this experience, and this is a little bit what Sam Harris talks about. He's like, you know, the illusion of free will is itself an illusion, that if we really get down to the nuts and bolts of what we actually experience, I mean, I guess you tell me, I mean, do you have this experience of not knowing where your thoughts come from, not knowing where your feelings are coming from, feeling like they just arise?
Yeah, but in the analogy, that's like the wind. Like I don't know where the wind is coming from. And even if I feel like I'm the captain of the ship, I don't feel like I'm the one that's creating the wind, and I'm the one that's creating the waves and the water, and I'm the one that's built the thing. You know, like there's only a little bit that I'm actually doing. So I certainly have that experience that you described with meditation, where I'm aware of my thoughts that are just rising up almost, you know, like I don't know where they're coming from. But I do know that once I become aware of them, I can do something with them.
But so why do you do something with them?
Why do I do something with them?
Yeah. Why do you do something rather than nothing? You know, a thought occurs and you decide to move. I mean,
well, so if Cammie and I get into an argument or something like really silly, where she'll ask me if I wiped out the microwave after I heated up my curry from Trader Joe's, and I feel myself starting to get upset. Like, how dare you even ask me that question? Of course, I'm going to clean up after myself. I know from myself in the past, there would have been times where I would have said something really sarcastic, something really biting, something mean as a reaction to that, because I was upset that she was even questioning whether I was going to clean that up or not. And I don't know if I understand exactly where that reaction comes from, or why I would get upset with something like that. I think I know. I've got some stories around it. Whether those stories are true or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it has to do with my relationship with my dad when I was a kid, but who knows? But what I do know is in that moment, I don't want to do anything to hurt her. I don't want to say that sarcastic, biting thing, although I know I'm really fucking good at it.
Yeah.
I could rip somebody to shreds if I wanted to, and I don't. And so why do I want to exercise some control over that for harmony in the relationship, for harmony in the environment that I'm in? Where if I hadn't become aware of those things, or if I thought that I was just a leaf on the tree and I'm feeling this frustration right now, so just let it out, that's the natural thing to do, I wouldn't be living here right now.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, so I mean, I feel like when you drive down like that, okay, so you have your wife asking about the microwave, and you have the initial response, the anger, and then you have a different response, the restraint. But in both cases, it's not something that you control. You know, both of those things are coming from prior experiences. You could probably tell a story about both as far as what.
Yeah. Oh, I remember we did have this back and forth in the email a little bit, because I told you about Dr. Jerome.
Right.
Did you listen to that one? The calm is contagious, and so is everything else.
No, I didn't listen to the episode yet.
Okay. Yeah, because he gives this example of being triggered by his wife. His wife went and screamed because she saw a cockroach in the pantry, and he associates that with the time that his dad had a heart attack and his mom did CPR and broke his rib, and then he died and the mom screamed, and now he just, he had that fight or flight amygdala response. That those were the prior causes that arose without his conscious will or intention making them happen.
Yep.
So when she gave that scream, I immediately went into that space, primal trigger. So in that space, am I responsible for my feeling of panic? Is she responsible for what she thinks when she sees a cockroach? Absolutely not. Now, as soon as she becomes aware that the scream that she's just offered has put me into one of the quintessentially most traumatic places that I've ever encountered, is she responsible for how she handles her emotion, what she says and thinks next, and how she engages with me in terms of what she feels is appropriate based on her felt sense of safety? Absolutely. She's become aware and she's deciding how to engage, right? And then am I responsible for being triggered and being taken back to what my body's protocol was hearing that scream, thinking I've got to protect her, I need to protect myself, something's wrong? No, that's a survival strategy. But am I responsible for collecting my thoughts and my emotions and reining in my reaction as quickly as possible, so that in my fight or flight response and in my sympathetic response and in my sympathetic storm, I don't respond as if my life is in danger or someone else's life is in danger, which my reaction in that space is to get angry because it's so intense, right? So I think what we're talking about is, am I responsible for the base nature of how thoughts and emotions are created? No. Am I responsible for the environment that produced that thought in terms of what nurtured it? No. Am I responsible for the discipline-based conditioning that I grew up in, that I was not yet an authority figure in, and I didn't have a seat at the executive table to make a decision about what that looks like and how to respond and what we qualify as appropriate? No. But once I developed conscientiousness and competence and consciousness, and I started to move into the driver's seat, am I responsible for how I choose to respond once I understand that I'm reacting? 100% that's on me.
Yeah.
So I think it's a transitional space, but initially, no, it actually takes a lot of development to get to the point that you can even be aware of what your thoughts, emotions, and actions are, never mind be responsible for them.
But as soon as he became aware of that, and he knew not to take it out on his wife, he knew there are things that I can do right now. I can stop, I can take a breath, I can give myself a timeout, I can calm myself down, because this is my autonomous, is that the right word?
Autonomic
nervous system.
Yeah.
Autonomic nervous system that's doing this. And so I am going to step in right now, this conscious agent, little circle, whatever you want to call it, if you think it's there or not.
Yeah.
And say, I am going to make the choice now to do this.
Yeah. And so I think I don't think that's the right way of looking at it. I don't think that's a way of I don't think that's an example of free will. I think that's an example of expanded awareness, expanded consciousness. But the things that allows him to have space and to react in a different way, those also have prior causes. So how did he learn that this response was automatic and came from trauma? Did he read it in a book? Did he,
He chose to go to school.
He chose to go to school.
He chose to become a neuroscientist or whatever he is, neurologist. He went to the school. He made a series of choices along the way that gave him this kind of information.
Yeah, and if we drill into any one of those choices, eventually we're going to get back to, well, why did he do that? Well, he wanted to. He had a thought that he should. He had a desire, he had an intention, and ultimately those intentions were not consciously generated and came from prior causes. So then you spin it back and into this moment. Okay, now he doesn't. So now he has the same trauma trigger where his wife is screaming, and in that catalog of causes, now we have the trauma with his mom, and we also have the new information about, how that's an automatic process, and, some awareness of why that happens. We have some training as far as breath work. We have some maybe therapy or, other things. All of those things are now variables. All those things are now prior causes to that new moment. And those are what allow them to.
I don't have a problem with any of that, Michael. No. I guess I just get confused as to then what it is that we're even talking about. Is he responsible? He's not responsible for the feeling that arises when he hears the scream.
Right.
Is he responsible for what he does once he becomes consciously aware of that?
I think it's almost exactly the same, in the sense that his response from the scream.
Can you give me just like a yes or a no? Is he responsible?
No, I don't think he is.
He's not responsible.
No, not in the sense that we're discussing as far as being an autonomous, independent agent where he is choosing, to react differently. All of it, the reaction, the new reaction of not freaking out at his wife is just a result of all the causes, which also includes some of the other things besides the trauma.
So all of the words that you wrote to me in that email, are you responsible for having written them and sent them to me?
So it just depends on what you mean by responsible, right? I mean, so there's some practical implications for society where we hold people responsible, for hurting other people. So in that sense, I am responsible for my actions, where I have to have the consequences of what I do.
What I'm trying to do is figure, because one of the big questions that I have is, why is this so important to you? And I think I heard a little bit of that when you said, I used to believe that I was the captain of the ship when I was Mormon, but now I realize that all of Mormonism is bullshit. And so this is going down with the ship. I can't allow myself to believe that anymore, because then I might get sucked into like foolishness or something like that again. That's my guess as to where it's the motivation. So that's one question. I'll let you respond to that in a second. But the second one is, how is what you're saying anything other than predeterminism, that we just don't have any choice at all? We are just like a leaf that falls off of a tree, and we're subject to the whims of everything that's going on around us. And we aren't responsible for where we land or how we move or what we do, because that is so contrary to the way that every single person lives life and experiences life. And that seems like that seems like a frightening path to go down, to say, I'm not responsible for my actions, and I'm not responsible for my choices.
Well, I mean, does it have to be frightening? I mean, does it have to be negative? The idea that we can have a little more empathy for people and understand that we're not, completely responsible for things that we do, but that we already do this to an extent, right? I mean, and Sam Harris brings up some of these examples of, if you have a guy who murders someone and he's completely healthy versus a guy who murders someone and has a tumor on his brain,
on their brain,
So, or if we find out that someone robbed a store for the fun of it versus they robbed a store because their kids are hungry and are gonna, die. I mean, so we already do this calculus of, we start to take in the background and the context and the prior causes when we decide how responsible someone is. And it's just extending that idea that like really everything flows from prior causes. Really everything is part of this causal chain of, cause and effect. And so we can cut each other some slack. We can be a little.
I love that. I love cutting people some slack and giving the benefit of the doubt. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that the way that Sam Harris, I don't know if it's the way that Sam Harris is presenting it or just the confusion that I have around that, like I really liked the metaphor of the leaf falling from the tree versus steering the ship. I mean, I think that really epitomizes the crux of the issue for me.
Yeah.
That one seems like it's very black and white, like all or nothing, like it's all predetermined forces or none, where it could be 95%, it could be 99% predetermined, it could be 99.9%, but there's still that little small sliver in the moment where I can go, I'm at a fork in the road, I'm either going to go right or I'm going to go left, and I've got everything in my body is screaming at me, go right, those predetermined causes, and I go, fuck that, I'm going left.
Yeah,
I'm going to do something different this time. And maybe that's from a predetermined cause too.
Yeah,
maybe it is, but it's still like my experience of living, and especially as I've gotten more into meditation, mindfulness, paying attention to these thoughts that just arise, that I do have a choice on what I can do with them, and whether that's just an illusion or not. The responsibility to act, to make the best choice that I can with the information that I have in front of me is solely mine.
So how does that work? So do you think that the cause and effect of the universe stops there when it comes to, that?
No, I think it keeps going. So
how is your choice become independent from everything that came before?
And I didn't say anything about independence. It arises from it.
Well, I mean,
so go back to my microwave, cleaning out the microwave example. Like I have this thought that comes into my head that's a really snarky comeback, and I've got a choice of whether I am going to say that out loud or not.
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, because you have the snarky thought. And then also you have all these other variables that then react. I mean, so if we wanted to take the leaf example and just complicate it to try to reflect this. So instead of just the wind, maybe there's also rain, or maybe there is another tree, so let's say the normal thing is that there's no rain, there's no wind, there's no other impediment between the leaf and the ground. And so that would be the snarky thought then comes up and you say it. But now we have the leaf falls and the wind blows. So that's, one experience or disposition that you have, which then is in conflict or in concert with the wind and the rain. And then it lands on another tree. Either way, there are these things that keep it from hitting the ground. Something else happens. They're all just part of the same causal mix that leads to the last thing. It's not like there's no will in there. There's no choice.
Okay. Sure feels like it. Sure seems like I have that.
Well, I mean,
do you have solid evidence for this? That there's no, or are we just going by like what Sam Harris says?
What would the evidence look like? I mean, you mentioned some of it. They've done different studies on this.
I don't know. I don't know how I don't know how this would be proven.
I mean, I think, just from an argument standpoint, you take that everything that we know about the universe is causal, that there is cause and effect. Our minds, our brains, our bodies are made of biological matter, so they're subject to the laws of the universe.
Yeah.
So I guess I have a harder time seeing how do we make an exception for that when it comes to our decisions? How do we say these decisions, sure, we're kind of subject to everything that comes before, but then there's a point where I can take a step back and I can choose something else, and it's not influenced by what came before. It's independent. It's free.
Yeah. So if you're saying free being independent from any prior causes, that's impossible.
Well,
it's impossible for anybody to be free and independent from prior causes. But what if the prior causes sets up a circumstance that gives somebody a choice between 3 things? And it sets the table or for 10 things.
Sure.
And then in that moment, and then in that moment, those prior causes, whatever's going on in the universe, all of it at every single level is giving you in each moment the ability to make a choice between certain things that are out there, because that's the experience of life.
Yeah, I mean, I still think, okay, so we know that we have options. We know that there are, there's a fork in the road and we go left or we go right. But why?
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to go left. Why did I want that? I don't know. That came from.
But whether you know or not is irrelevant to the fact that you made a choice in that time.
Well, I mean, so in this case, right or left, I'm saying that it came from some prior causes, which then created that intention or that desire to go left. And you're saying, no, there were prior causes maybe that brought me to the fork in the road, but I could make an autonomous choice to go left. And that is a reflection of my steering the ship.
Yeah. Or to stop the car, get out and commit suicide, or to stop the car, turn around and drive the other way, or to go off the road altogether and go in some completely different direction. Or, there's all kinds of things that you could do when you come to the fork in the road, and all of them are going to be touched by prior causes. But I don't know what to make of this sense and of this experience of being able to choose in the moment.
So you have the experience that your choice is fully your own. You don't feel like it comes from something that came before.
Don't say the word fully.
You feel like it's your own. You feel like it's 99% determined, but 1% is you.
Something like that. Well, and like the culmination of everything, 100% is natural causes and a priori causes. But it's still in that moment, what am I going to do?
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like there's a conflict between those two ideas, because on the one hand, you're acknowledging that things come 100% from prior causes, but then still maintaining the idea that there is a space for a free choice that maybe deviates from those prior causes.
I don't think it could deviate from the prior cause.
Then where's the freedom?
But the prior causes, like if you're thinking about a line of dominoes, when it's very linear, and when one hits the one in front of it, it's only going to go in a certain direction.
Sure.
That's not what we're talking about. Like yes, there's prior causes, but it doesn't mean that once we get to this moment, it can only go forward in one particular thing. There's some kind of force that I have to say, is this going to veer off to that? That's why I like the steering the ship metaphor. It can go to the right, it can go to the left. It's still, there's this momentum, this inertia. It's moving in this direction from the prior causes. But the prior causes have also created a central nervous system with this little portion of a central nervous system that is this egoic conscious awareness that does make choices on what kind of food I'm going to eat, where I'm going to live, what kind of job I'm going to have, what kind of people I'm going to hang around with, what kind of music I'm going to listen to, like these types of things that absolutely are influenced by prior causes, but not solely. I don't know. I feel like at this point, like a dog chasing its tail.
Yeah, no, well, so let me ask this. I mean, and you tell me if we need to wrap up. I know we're past the time.
Yeah.
But so when you were a member of the church, did you believe that God knew the future perfectly, that he knew what everyone was going to do before they did it?
Probably.
I mean, so how, I mean, so I did too, right? I mean, and so in a funny way, I think Mormons really are determinists in this sense. And we try to find a way to kind of explain around it. But this idea that the only way that God knows the future because he knows us so well, and he knows all of the causes and the factors and the variables in the universe so well and so perfectly, that he knows how all those things are going to crash together. And so he can say with a certainty what the future will be. But that implies determinism. That implies cause and effect. That implies that everything is going to flow from what came before it.
Yeah. And I do remember bringing up that paradox many times as a Mormon in conjunction with things like the lost 116 pages of the Book of Mormon, or, like, if God knew that this was going to happen, then why did it play out that way? Or why did he create contingencies where somebody could choose to do this? Because there were also those scriptures in the DNC that said to Joseph Smith, if you fail, God has prepared somebody else to take your place, So there's all these contingencies that are laid out. So there is this paradox of God knows everything. But I again, like what I credit it to now, just having gone into, and boy, this is a terrible place to end it, but we really do have to wrap this up or I'm going to get in trouble. With the quantum energy, that where it's a probability, like things don't necessarily, particles don't necessarily exist only in one space and time, but in like a particle or a probability cloud, which is the nature of the fundamental building block energy of the universe. So is it possible that it's in some realm of reality that we just have absolutely no conscious awareness of? There are multiple versions of reality happening all at once, and any kind of choice that we've ever made or could ever made does exist somewhere, somehow, in some time within that quantum realm of probability, where every single it's a crazy thought. And but
I'm actually reading a book.
How helpful it is.
I'm reading a book about that right now. The parallel universe stuff. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, and I think, at the end of the day, who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, so right now, today, I find myself to be convinced by the Sam Harris arguments, but I don't know if it's right. I don't know, if there's maybe something else that we could learn.
I don't even know how valuable it is. I mean, I like what you said about giving people the benefit of the doubt and going, okay, it wasn't totally their fault. There were things that were going on beyond their control.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that doesn't apply to every argument. Sure, the guy that has the tumor on the brain, but with every single person we're doing that with, I'm just not totally comfortable. And especially, like being a life coach, I have worked with clients over the last year and a half and watched some really magnificent transformations. And I know that sounds very much like what I said on a mission, when like somebody joins the church and their life just, and there's kind of an ick factor to that. But I've seen it, and I've seen it because they wanted to, they made changes, they did mindfulness stuff, and they really exercise and I think grow this ability to change the narrative, to change the story, change the ways that you're viewing things. I mean, I've seen some really amazing shifts in people, and maybe that's just the leaf falling from the tree and I'm a raindrop that is,
you are the wind, Glenn, you are the wind carrying us along. I mean, to end on a positive note, right? I mean, I think there are some positive implications about this, right? I mean, because so much of so much of religion, this idea of, you're responsible for everything. So there's guilt, there's shame, there's, punishment in society, like we lock people up and we really do all these things, as a consequence. I mean, if we did have more of this Buddhist, acceptance of, reality is as it is, we could be more pragmatic, and that's one of the things that Sam Harris argues for, is that, okay, like we have to deter behavior and we have to keep people safe. And if we can see that they're a danger to other people, we got to stop that somehow. But we don't need to punish people. We don't need to, go on this, revenge kind of thing. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, I feel like that applies if you can. I think it is about benefit of the doubt. It's like if you understood perfectly what was going on behind someone, you're much more likely to give them a break.
Yeah. So this is a way that has helped you embrace the discomfort of uncertainty.
I don't know. I mean, I'm still uncomfortable with this idea of not having free will, and I'm still figuring out what I believe about it, and that's part of why I, really enjoyed the podcast and why I took the time to kind of write out my thoughts. Because since leaving the church, making that decision, I'm trying to figure out, what do I believe and what feels right, and so I guess this is all part of the journey to kind of work through it and see what's going on.
You and me both, brother. Well, thank you for coming on, Michael. I'm glad that the wind blew you in my direction.
Absolutely.
And,
appreciate it, Glenn.
Yeah. Look forward to talking with you again if you ever want to.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care. See you, Michael.
Put down the weapons that you use against yourself. You don't need them anymore.
Hey there. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. Now, I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I have more to say about this topic, and I'm going to do that with a follow-up behind-the-scenes sharing time episode on Patreon. So, if you're in a position where you can throw me a few dollars each month to support the work that I put into creating this podcast, please come and support me on Patreon, where you'll also get access to additional content. Did you know that I also create sharing time episodes that are available only to Patreon subscribers? I've been doing that for a few years, so there's a lot of content there that you can have access to. So please come and support this podcast if you can. I greatly appreciate it.
Hi, this is Hillary.
Matthew. Ryan.
Carol.
Keith.
Ashley. And I like to play bingo online while listening to Infants on Thrones.
You can comment on this episode on the website, infantsonthrones.com.
And if you really like what you hear, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes.
I did. Anyone for the closing prayer?
My worst crime is an inside job. Dark thoughts taking over like an inside mob. I tune into the scene between the eyes and take a breath.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.
I sit still and watch the thoughts float past me. Never mind the future, never mind what the past be. I like to jump and let the universe catch me. Free fall, watch the beauty blow past me. I keep my pockets light, destination in sight. Keep my actions elevated to compassionate heights. I'm walking past the fight, laying down on Sunday night. Choosing love when I pick up this mic.